What if I told you you could take a less expensive steak and make it as tender as a filet mignon? Well, you can, and it all starts with sous vide. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And today's recipe is for sous vide sirloin steak. And it is so easy to do. Now, I'm using the Ninja Possible Cooker Pro and the sous vide function. However, there are many appliances, Instant Pots, Ninja Foodi appliances that have the sous vide function. So check your appliance, see if you have the sous vide function, and if so, you can follow along with this video. Or if you have a sous vide circulator, one that is an immersion circulator to sous vide cook, you can use that as well. You just need a large enough pot. And if you have a sous vide circulator, you probably already know how to set it up. All right, for the Possible Cooker Pro or even the Ninja Foodi or any of the other types of appliances, the main difference between these appliances and a sous vide circulator is we are not circulating the water. And at first I thought, oh, that's not gonna work very well, is it? But guess what? It works great, okay? No problems. All of the Ninja Foodi appliances that I have that have sous vide function, it works great. And honestly, the price of this cooker is worth the sous vide function alone, in my opinion. Now, I have filled up the water to the sous vide line. On the inside of the pot, it will say sous vide. You fill it up with just regular temperature water. What I mean by that, not freezing cold water, not boiling water, just tap water, okay? Room temperature-ish, somewhere between 60 and 75 degrees. Fill it to the sous vide line, put the lid on, that's very important. And we're gonna turn the Ninja Foodi Possible Cooker Pro on. We're gonna go to the sous vide function, which is over here on the right side. The temperature that we're gonna set, I do need to explain why I'm setting it at 130 and how you would adjust it for the temperature of steak that you like. But I'm gonna set it at 130 and we're gonna hit start. And then we're gonna take the time up to 4 hours. We're gonna leave it there. Now, it's going to take a little bit longer for the water to heat all the way up to 130 degrees than when it says to add food, in my experience anyway. So I have a little thermometer here, and I urge you to check your water temp before you add the food. Now, something that's gonna cook for 4 hours, honestly, you could add it in right now. It's not gonna make that big of a difference. But there are some foods like sous vide shrimp, which I made a little bit earlier because we're gonna serve up a little surf and turf sous vide style today. You don't want to really cook the shrimp longer than 15 minutes. So I let the pot come all the way up to the appropriate temperature for shrimp, which is 140 degrees Fahrenheit, before I even add the shrimp in. The nice thing about the Ninja Possible Cooker Pro is as it's preheating, it's telling you the temperature of the water. However, don't go by that, okay? It's not really that accurate. Go by your thermometer. So I can set this in here, which is just going to the very tippy top part of the water, and it's at 72 degrees, okay? So it's not at 80. It's probably maybe 84, closer to the bottom. All right, now let's talk about the steak and the thickness and the size and those kind of things. So what I have here are two 10-ounce, 1-inch sirloin steaks. I picked 1 inch, not because it's my favorite thickness or anything. I actually like them a little bit thicker usually, but I think it's a very common size of thickness that you can get from most supermarkets when you go to buy a sirloin steak. These are very lean steaks. They are delicious, but they tend to be on the tougher side. They are also less expensive, a lot less expensive than a filet mignon. Now, personally, Jeff likes a meaty steak. He likes to really have to cut it and chew it. Not this girl. I like filet mignon. So I started to sous vide these. And we did a little test. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And it took 4 hours of sous vide at 130 degrees Fahrenheit for the steak to cut and have the tenderness of a filet. So that's what I recommend for a 1-inch thick steak. This is 10 ounces, but it won't really matter how many ounces you have. You could have an 8-ounce steak, you could have a 6-ounce steak. If it's 1 inch thick, it's going to take about 4 hours to reach the tenderness of a filet mignon. Okay, so you can use that as a guide because the steak will be fully cooked within about an hour. Okay, so an hour to 90 minutes is the minimum amount of time that you want it in the hot water bath. But 4 hours if you want it to get to that filet tenderness, okay? Next thing I want to talk about is seasoning. Okay, when you get your steaks home from the grocery store, if you vacuum seal them and you store them in the freezer, you can salt and pepper them, put them in your vacuum sealer bags, and then freeze them until you're ready to sous vide. And you can sous vide from frozen, add an hour to your time. So instead of 4 hours, we would sous vide for 5 hours if it was frozen for a 1-inch thick steak. Okay, so this is a great meal prep thing because sous vide cooking is not always fast, but if it's already seasoned up and bagged up, you can just throw it right in the hot water bath and walk away and let it cook. And it's going to cook perfectly every single time, which is the beauty of sous vide cooking. All right, here is the steak that I'm gonna use a regular freezer bag, because if you're new to sous vide cooking or you don't have a vacuum sealer, you might say, well, wait, I'm not gonna go out and buy a vacuum sealer just to sous vide cook. You don't have to. Just buy some Ziploc freezer bags and they are gonna work perfectly fine, especially for these lower temperature sous vide cooks, which most things you're going to cook sous vide style are gonna be lower temperature. So you're gonna be fine with this. Now to season the steak or whatever food you're gonna season up before you sous vide. You wanna be careful. You do not want to over season before you sous vide, or your food can end up too salty, too peppery, too garlicky, too oniony, whatever seasonings you're using. It really accentuates those flavors. So I do a 2-step process. I do a 1/2 teaspoon of fine ground sea salt to a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper for this 10-ounce by 1-inch thick sirloin tip steak. And that is what I like. You use your judgment. You can also sous vide without any seasoning and then season right before you sear the steak. But I like to do it both ways. I think this will start to penetrate the steak and really flavor it nicely, but it won't overwhelm it. So don't do any more than a 1/2 teaspoon of salt per steak, or you might get too salty during the sous vide process. Now I'm gonna show you the displacement method for sealing the steak in the Ziploc bag. And you can do that anytime. You can do it while the water is warming up, which is what I recommend. You don't wanna wait till it gets too hot or it might actually be a little too warm on your fingers. So pat this seasoning in and then put your steak into the bag. And you want whatever food you're cooking sous vide style to be in a single layer and not touching another bit of food. If I had a larger bag, I could do 2 steaks in this easily, but I would want to keep a little separation between the two because it's important that the water can flow around the entire piece of meat so that it cooks evenly. All right, I'm gonna wash up my hands, get these into the sink, and then I'm gonna show you the displacement method for how to use a Ziploc bag when you sous vide cook. All right, let's take a little temperature of our water now so we can see. It's showing that it's 123 degrees. We need it to get up to 130 before we add the steak, but I have a feeling it's probably more like 115 or so. Let's take a look. Well, I am not even close to being right. It's about 98 degrees, but that is perfectly fine. Don't worry about that because when it says add food, you don't have to add the food. You want to wait until it gets up to 130 before you add the food, and that will take about 20 minutes, I would say, after it says add food. Okay, so here we go. We've got our steak in our Ziploc bag. The Ziploc bag is open. You want to close it about halfway. So zip it closed about halfway. Then you want to put the bag into the water, and we're displacing the air out as we push it down into the water. And you want to make sure though that the very top of the bag where the zipper closure is does not get underwater. When it is at the water line, you then seal it the rest of the way up, and you have now a nice steak that has almost all of the air out. There's still gonna be a little bit of air in there. It's not as good as a vacuum sealer, but it works perfectly fine for sous videing in your Possible Cooker Pro or whatever appliance you have. So it works great. All right, so that's the displacement method. And obviously, this is the vacuum seal. Now I'm gonna put the lid back on so we can let this go ahead and finish heating up, and then we will get our steaks in, and I will show you how to arrange them in the Possible Cooker Pro so that they don't rise up to the top, because they need to be submerged completely in the water. All right, so it says add food now, and something kind of weird happened. In fact, it made me doubt myself for a second. It had read 132 degrees Fahrenheit, even went up to 134 degrees Fahrenheit before it said add food. And I thought, did I set my temperature right? But I did for 130 degrees. So that was kind of weird that it went up above that. But anyway, I still don't think it's gonna be ready. So let's just take a quick temp. And we are at about 117 degrees. Midway through here, so yeah. So we have a little bit of time to go. Don't worry about it switching over from add food to the countdown. It makes no difference. We can adjust this time back to 4 hours when we put our steaks in. So give it another 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll take a temperature again, and as soon as it gets up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, I'll add the steak in and show you how to keep them submerged. All right, guess what I forgot? I wanted to put a probe thermometer into one of these steaks, and since this one was the one that I did via displacement, I can easily redo that. So I'm gonna put this probe right in the center here. That way we can monitor the temp on the app while it sous vide cooks. All right, that looks like that's in a good spot, right about in the center there. So now let me get this bag sealed back up again. All right, there we go. All right, there we go. 20 minutes it took after it said add food for the temperature to come up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we can put our steaks into the warm water bath. Now you can do as many or as few steaks as you want at a time, as long as they will fit and be submerged under the liquid. Now, I'm not seeing any issues with mine rising up. I got enough air out of both bags, so it's not gonna create a problem. However, there are some types of foods when you're sous videing that kind of like to rise to the top, like the shrimp that I did earlier. So you may find, if you have the rack, you may find that to come in handy to just sit it right on top, which will keep the bags down. Even with the shrimp and the rack on there, it still wanted to float up some. So you could also put a bowl with some water on top to keep everything weighted down. I won't need to do that for this recipe. The rack will be sufficient. All right, so we're gonna put the lid back on, and we're gonna take our time back up to 4 hours. Our temperature is at 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and I wanna talk about that for just a minute. Normally, when I sous vide my steaks, no matter what type they are, and I'm gonna sous vide them for an hour to 2 hours, I sous vide at about 120 degrees Fahrenheit because I really like a medium rare, but on the rare side of a steak when it's seared. So I go on a lower temperature. However, anytime that you are going to be sous vide cooking a steak for longer than 2 hours, the minimum temperature for food safety is 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is because in order to be considered meeting food safety guidelines, the internal temperature of the steak needs to reach 130 degrees Fahrenheit within a 2 hour period of time, okay? So I set it just to be safe at 130 degrees. And when I first started testing this recipe, I was kind of disappointed in that because I thought, this isn't gonna give me the steak that I want. But guess what? It did. 130 degrees Fahrenheit will give you a beautiful medium rare steak even after you sear it well on both sides. So don't worry about that. 130 degrees Fahrenheit is fine. If you want to do 120 degrees Fahrenheit, you can just cook it for 2 hours, and it's going to be just a little bit tougher than a filet mignon, but it'll still be delicious. Now, let's say you're somebody who likes their steak without any type of pink or red in the center. You want it medium to medium well. You can definitely go up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or even to 150 degrees Fahrenheit and do it for 3 to 4 hours. And your sirloin is going to be cooked exactly the way you like it, and it'll still be tender and delicious. The beauty of sous vide cooking is it is a low and slow type of cooking. It locks in all the moisture of the meat, and the time that you cook it will also tenderize it. It's just a phenomenal way to cook steak, and you cannot get it wrong. As long as your sous vide appliance is working correctly, you cannot mess it up because you dial in the temperature and you hit start, and that's it. And now I'm gonna walk away for 4 hours, and when it's done, we will sear it up, and I'm gonna use the Possible Cooker Pro to do that as well. And I'm gonna use some smoked tallow for a little bit of wonderful beefy flavor in our steak. And then we'll serve it up with some sous vide shrimp. There we go. We have sous vide at 130 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours. The maximum temperature that the steak got to was 132.8 because that was the maximum temperature that the water got to. So just because I set it to 130 doesn't mean it's always going to stay at 130. So you do want to check your appliance to make sure of any variables that might occur. But 132 is perfectly fine for me, and I have never had any issues whatsoever with sous vide using this Ninja appliance or any of the others. So I really do feel comfortable telling you to just set it and forget it, okay? My husband and I will usually split a sirloin, especially when they're 10 ounces. So I'm gonna only sear one of them. That is another beauty to sous videing your steaks, is you could sous vide them all. You could sous vide like 20 of them if you wanted to. Let them cool completely, so put them in the refrigerator overnight. Then you could pop them in the freezer, okay? When you want to reheat them, they're already fully cooked and tenderized, so we don't have to go through that long 4-hour process. You'll just set it to about 125 Fahrenheit and let it cook for about an hour if you want a medium rare steak. So that will warm it all the way through, and then you sear it just like normal. So this is great for meal prep. So I'm gonna put this one to the side. This is the vacuum sealed one, and that's the one I want to be able to put into the freezer for another meal. All right, so let's take this one out, and I'm gonna show you how much liquid is in the bag. There's not a lot, okay? So I'm gonna set that on the cutting board. There is, I would say this is about 2 tablespoons, if that, of liquid for a 10-ounce steak. So that is not a lot of moisture loss. That is gonna leave our steak nice and juicy. The other thing when it comes to sous videing and then searing steak and then cutting it, is you don't have to wait for a rest period. Now, what's gonna happen is I'm gonna use the Possible Cooker Pro to actually sear the steak. So I'm gonna dump the water out, get it preheated. Meanwhile, this is gonna cool off a little bit, so I'm probably gonna take the probe out, throw it right back in that Ziploc bag until I'm ready to get it into the hot tallow. And I'm gonna sear it with smoked tallow for a little smoky flavor to the steak. All right, the pot has preheated. Now I'm gonna add in some tallow. And this is smoked tallow, like I mentioned. I'm gonna add in about 1.5 tablespoons to start with. What I want is a nice thin layer on the bottom of the pot. The next thing I recommend doing before you sear your steak after sous videing is to take it out of whatever bag it's in and place it on a little bit of a paper towel there or some other absorbent material so that you can get the moisture off. I also like to salt and pepper again, okay? And for this, I like to put a coarse salt, so just a little bit on each side, and then pat it in. Okay? And a coarse pepper. All right, the tallow has heated up, and now we're gonna get this in to sear. Put it straight in the middle. Or if you're gonna do 2 steaks at once, you can put them side by side, that's fine. And then press down so that we get a good connection with the surface of the steak and the hot surface. That's gonna give us that sear. And let it go for about 90 seconds. Then we will flip and sear the other side, and then we're ready to eat it. All right, we have a beautiful sear on both sides. I am really, really happy with that. If you're gonna use the Possible Cooker Pro to sear, make sure you let it go through the preheat, then add in your fat, which should be a high temperature fat like tallow, or you could even use probably some sort of a peanut oil or something like that would also work. Don't use butter, it's gonna burn, but you could put butter on right now, of course, that would be delicious. Now remember, when you sous vide and you sear, you do not have to wait for it to rest. So even though I'm gonna make a kind of a fancy plate for us for dinner, for you guys, I'm definitely gonna cut straight through the middle here with a butter knife. I went back and forth. Is this gonna work? Let's try it, you know? Hey, I'm saying this is gonna be as tender as filet. And I can cut the sirloin with the butter knife. That is awesome. All right, I'm pleased with that cook. That is medium rare all the way through. Now let me take a little taste. Oh my gosh, that corner really cut nice. Here we go. Oh my goodness. Filet tender, so good. Wow. I'm so excited. Sous vide is such a wonderful way to get your steaks cooked perfectly. Now, oh my gosh, I can't get over how good that is. I also have sous vide shrimp, which this recipe is already on my website, and it is a perfect way to cook your shrimp ahead of time, put them in the refrigerator, and then when you want a delicious shrimp cocktail, just mix up some cocktail sauce. The shrimp are perfectly cooked when you sous vide them, and it takes 15 minutes. That's it. Look at this. Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh my goodness. So good. So tender. I mean, perfectly cooked shrimp. And shrimp can be a little bit tricky because they overcook very quickly. Now my husband, I don't know, something's wrong with him. He does not like cocktail sauce, which has horseradish in it. So tonight, for tonight's dinner, I made a Parmesan garlic sauce. Then I put the sous vide shrimp under the broiler for just a few minutes with the dipping sauce in right inside. Look at this. Oh my gosh. So good. So good. I don't know which one I like better. They're both so good. And the shrimp is perfectly cooked, and it is now warmed through, but it's not overcooked or rubbery. It's perfect. Sous vide is a perfect way to get the right temperature on lean meats and proteins that tend to overcook really quickly. It is a set it and forget it kind of cooking technique. And the Ninja Possible Cooker Pro, although this is not a commercial, I'm not pushing this appliance. There's plenty of different ways to sous vide. But the Ninja Possible Cooker Pro does a fantastic job at sous vide. And I also made this bread in the Possible Cooker Pro. I proofed it, shaped it, proofed it, and baked it. And I got browning on both sides. This recipe is gonna come out soon. I have not cut into it yet. Let's do that right now. Let's see what it looks like. Ready? Oh my gosh, I'm a little nervous. Let's see. Well, it's good. It's a nice bread. It doesn't have as many holes as I would like, but that's probably more my process than anything else. I would prefer it a little bit crunchier, which I could get just by putting it in the oven. But the fact that you can bake it right in that Possible Cooker Pro is a pretty decent advantage. Let's see what it tastes like. Oh, it is a little crunchy. I'm happy.